Good evening, everyone. It gives us great pleasure to be here tonight in the wonderful MoLI Museum of Literature Ireland here in Stephen's Green to celebrate the publication by the Gallery Press of the collected poems of Eiléan ní Chuilleanáin. This is a book of singular beauty and mysteries. It opens doors into multiple unforgettable worlds, and it's a hugely impressive collected poems containing not only poetry from more than 50 years and 9 collections, but also, excitingly, new, previously unpublished poems. Just to say a few things about Eiléan. Eiléan ní Chuilleanáin was born in Cork into an intellectual, academic and Republican family. Her father, Cormac Ó Chuilleanáin, was Professor of Irish at University College Cork, and her mother was the writer Eilish Dillon, a niece of Joseph Mary Plunkett, one of the signatories of the 1916 proclamation. In fact, she's just been at an event in Galway to celebrate her mother's achievement. Eiléan was raised in a bilingual family. She was educated at University College Cork, and she continued on to Oxford on a scholarship where she obtained a B.Lit in Renaissance English.
Her first collection, Acts and Monuments, published by Gallery Press in 1972, won the Patrick Kavanagh Award. And today, the Gallery Press has published 9 subsequent collections of poems, including the Sunfish 2009, which won the Griffin International Poetry Prize, and the Mother House, which came out last year and which won the Irish Times Poetry Now Award. Eiléan was lecturer and subsequently professor of medieval and Renaissance literature in Trinity College Dublin, and is currently a fellow and professor of English emeritus at TCD and also member of Eistóna. She served as Ireland Professor of Poetry from 2016 to 2019, and she was married to the poet MacDara Woods, who died in 2018. Awarding ní Chuilleanáin the 2010 Griffin Prize, the judges noted she's a truly imaginative poet whose imagination is authoritative and transformative. Her poetry poses many questions, not always directly, and often chooses to leave the questions themselves unresolved, allowing them to resonate meaningfully past the actual poem's end. And so it falls to me, I think, to ask the first question. And just to start off with, first of all, many congratulations on the collected. It's a very significant and substantial achievement. And I was just wondering what it means to you to have your work in a single sort of edition like this. Is it daunting or exciting or maybe a bit of both?
It's a bit daunting because when you bring out a collected poems, you then have to ask yourself, what do I do now? But I have written one poem since it arrived, so it isn't quite the end. It's daunting because I had no idea that there was so much, and I found it very hard to decide what to leave out. It's also very exciting, of course, how could it not be?
Mm-hmm. Was there much leaving out?
No, not half enough. I was really quite indulgent, I think. Mm-hmm. But I thought, when you look at something that you've written as long ago as some of these poems were written, you think almost that they were written by another person, and you let them sink or swim, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you were totally right, Eiléan, to be indulgent and put them all in. It's a marvellous collection, and congratulations. But we'd love to hear you read a poem, and I know you want to start with Swineheart, which is a poem from actually your first collection, Acts and Monuments in 1972. So would you like to read that for us, Eiléan?
Yes, certainly.
Great.
This used to be the only poem of mine that if people ask me to read, but it's gone a little bit into the background recently, so it's nice to bring it out again. Swineherd. When all this is over, said the swineherd, I mean to retire where nobody will have heard about my special skills, and conversation is mainly about the weather. I intend to learn how to make coffee, at least as well as the Portuguese lay sister in the kitchen, and polish the brass fenders every day. I want to lie awake at night, listening to cream crawling to the top of the jug, and the water lying soft in the cistern. I want to see an orchard where the trees grow in straight lines, and the yellow fox finds shelter between the navy blue trunks, where it gets dark early in summer, and the apple blossom is allowed to wither on the bough.
Oh, thank you, Elaine. That's absolutely beautiful. That cream rising, I love it. But there's a huge sense of mystery, isn't there, in that poem? Like, I read it and I go, who is the lay Portuguese sister? Does it really get dark early in summer? Is there a yellow fox? But I love that about the poem. And I was just wondering, I know that you said, as a poet, I'm drawn to things that really are mysterious. It's not that you're making it up. So I was just wondering, would you talk a little bit about the mysterious in your poems?
I suppose, yes. I find that when I manage to write a poem that I'm reasonably happy with, it's often about something that I just don't understand. I don't understand really my own fascination with convents, because I spent my youth thinking that's definitely not for me. I don't understand quite the things that I feel when I'm looking, say, out of a train at an industrial landscape. I feel there's something intrusive, something that's trying to control me, and I don't know why I feel that. So I suppose that the sense of wanting to be somewhere else, wanting to see something different, I felt that quite strongly at one stage. I also wrote this during my first year of teaching, and I think I wanted to escape from the kind of pressure, because you never work as hard as you do in your first few years as a teacher.
That's true.
I'm sure you agree.
Yeah,
yes?
I do agree with that.
Yes.
You said, among the many things you said about poetry, you said a really serious use of language is a public good. Not using language in foolish and inappropriate and inaccurate ways is something everyone should learn. We need to know the things that language can do, and studying literature is one of the ways to find that out. And I was wondering, was literature always at the centre of your life, and did you always know that you would become a poet?
I think I didn't always know that I'd become a poet, but I did always know that I'd become a writer. I suppose it was just an expectation. There was a lot of it about. My father was a bit of an outsider in the Celtic studies world of his time. Everybody was into philology, and I don't know that, although he was fascinated by words, I don't know that he felt really comfortable with that, and he managed to be the person that lectured on poetry and collected folk tales, and so I mean it didn't just come from one side of my family. It seemed to be an absolute given.
That kind of leads me, because I was wondering, I mean, one of the striking things about poetry I find is the preoccupation with language. And of course, you mentioned your father. Growing up in a bilingual house must also have informed to some extent your ideas about language. And you said I was brought up to a certain extent bilingual, and that gives one a sense of always being unsure which is the right language to express oneself in. Obviously, you write mainly in English, but you've also written a little in Irish. In fact, last year you translated Eiléan and Enda into Irish, and there are poems in Irish towards the end of this collection. I was just wondering, were you ever tempted to be a bilingual poet, and what does Irish actually mean to you?
Oh, I've often thought about this. I think my earliest years, I was definitely very, very much a bilingual child. I was the eldest child, and then other children came along. I went to school. Cork at the time seemed to be quite hostile to Irish. Even from my earliest years, I was having to stand up for my name. Then I realised at a certain point that because I had never lived in an Irish-speaking community, I didn't feel that I had the tools. And very occasionally, I mean, the two poems published in this are not the only poems I've written in Irish. And I do often find it quite easy to translate into Irish. It seems to, because it's the alternative language, and translation is about alternatives. But to be a sort of a citizen of an Irish-speaking community is something I've never managed.
Sure.
Even though I not infrequently ended up late at night with drink taken, conversing fluently in Irish with people in strange places. But that isn't. It's not something that happens naturally, and therefore, I suppose, if you're going to write poetry, you need all the tools and resources that you can find.
So I'm just really wondering, Peter and I live together, we're poets, but we're just wondering how was that for you? Because I know you wrote together, you travelled together. There's some wonderful new poems at the end of the book about MacDara. There's Key Rings, there's The Blood Map, which I really enjoyed, and of course I've always loved the poem The Morandi Bridge. But I'm just wondering, how was it? Did you support each other, help each other along the way?
Yes, I mean, obviously we disagreed. That was how we knew we were actually saying what we thought.
Yeah.
We would not necessarily talk about a poem until it was nearly ready.
Yeah.
And then at that stage we would show each other. Not always, I mean, I've sometimes found a poem in a book that I hadn't seen before it appeared. But, and you feel that, well, here's somebody that you trust, that has the judgment, and who writes quite differently from you, and I think that actually is quite helpful too.
Yeah, that does help, I think, definitely.
Enda mentions MacDara, but of course you're also a member of a generation that included other very notable writers. I mean, thinking of Michael Harton, but also Pearse and Leland. And I wonder, would you say something about their influence on you as?
Yes, when I met Pearse and Leland, I was so young that they looked old. I mean, they were in their 40s, and so that was I did think of them as belonging to an earlier generation. They were very influential in different ways. I suppose the thing about Leland was just, I've been reading work of hers recently, just her sincerity, the sense that that you got from her poetry, that she was saying what she really meant. And when we were all editing together, she was inclined to say, I think this is made up. And now I make things up, and so for a while I didn't understand that. But she was very much, I think, again, it's a seriousness about what you do with poetry, but that it was something that you took seriously. And Pearse was, of course, very influential simply because of the breadth of his knowledge, the number of languages he spoke, his openness to things, which I think I was very inclined to look down my nose at all kinds of things when I was young. And so it was very important to me to come across somebody like Pearse who would, for example, read British war poetry with enthusiasm, something that I have always found difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean, amazing people and totally unique, and Leland was quite a character, wasn't she, as well? So
enormously.
Enormous character, yeah. So we move on now, Elaine, and I think you want to read Pygmalion's Image, don't you? It's from the Magdalene Sermon, which came out in 1989. So looking forward to hearing this, Elaine, Pygmalion's Image. Do you have it there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's stolen from Ovid, of course, but I did put in my own ideas as well.
Stealing is good, Elaine, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Much needed.
Pygmalion's Image. Not only her stone face laid back, staring in the ferns, but everything the scoop of the valley contains begins to move, and beyond the horizon the trucks beat the highway. A tree inflates gently on the curve of the hill, an insect crashes on the carved eyelid, grass blows westward from the roots as the wind knifes under her skin and ruffles it like a book. The crisp hair is real, wriggling like snakes, a rustle of veins, tick of blood in the throat, the lines of the face tangle and catch, and a green leaf of language comes twisting out of her mouth.
Thank you, Elaine, and an amazing ending as well to that poem. There's a great sense of drama in that poem, isn't there? I mean, when you read it, you just think, oh, poor Pygmalion, the sculptor in Metamorphosis, who falls in love with his statue, and then the gods, taking pity, do all that and bring her life, and she's almost Medusa-like. And I think your poems can be highly dramatic and really mysterious. There's that word again. And they often, I think, have an unsettling quality. I'm thinking of a poem like Going Back to Oxford, where you say, something to lose. It came in the equipment alongside the suicide pill and the dark blue card. That always seems unsettling to me. And from The Pig Boy, it was his bag of tricks she wanted, surely not him. So it's as if, it seems to me like you're a kind of storyteller, though it's not always clear who is speaking or to whom. And it's not that you're withholding information, but that your speakers they have a huge fluidity, I think, to them. So I suppose my question is, would you say that your imagination is very dramatic?
Well, I think something needs to happen in a poem. If something hasn't happened between the first and half line, then the poem isn't there. Mm-hmm. I think narrative, I suppose, and especially folk tales are dramatic. And The Pig Boy is really from the Hans Andersen story about the prince who disguises himself as the pig boy in order to court the princess, but she's only interested in his magic tricks. Yeah,
brilliant. Now, moving from magic and mystery to death and questions of pain and suffering and loss, and they play a very major part in your work. I often think that you use the mythic moment to process your own personal experience. And I'm thinking of the next poem that I thought you might read, where you use the mythic moment, the Assumption of Mary, as a means to discuss your own mother's passing. And again, I think there is a guarded secrecy to it. And I was just wondering, would you talk us into this poem, Fireman's Lift, from The Brazen Serpent? Read it first, because we'd love to hear it. And it's set in Parma Cathedral, isn't it, Elaine, where you and your brother and sister you were admiring Correggio's dome, is that right?
I was there with my parents, actually.
Oh, was it? Okay.
I don't think the others were there.
Oh, okay.
The thing about Parma Cathedral is it's a beautiful Romanesque cathedral, and my parents loved it, and I loved it. Mm. And then we got up to as far as the cupola, which has this Correggio painting, and they couldn't stand it. That this should be dumped on the top of a dark Romanesque church. And I thought it was just splendid, because my taste in painting is so much for those big, overpopulated paintings like Rubens' Last Judgment, which is in Munich. I used to go and look at it on my way to Rome. Yeah. And I think that the other thing about this is, when I was young, I tried to write a poem about Rubens' Last Judgment, and it was not a success. And when my mother was dying, she said to me about the nursing home, she said, the good thing about this place is all the beautiful girls. Right. And they were beautiful. Yeah. And I suddenly thought, I could write about that picture now, about the angels, because the nurses were having to lift her and move her and so on. And I know enough now to be able to write this poem.
Yeah, so a poem comes when it's ready, really, doesn't it, Elaine?
I think so,
yes. Definitely.
But also, when you're ready.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're able to manage it. The other thing, I suppose, about these pictures, these great big religious pictures, is, of course, we don't have them in Ireland because of our history. And then because of the kind of taste that was developing when we were getting our own art galleries and so on. It wasn't... they weren't the most popular. When I went to Toronto, when I got the Griffin Prize in Toronto to celebrate, I went and looked at Rubens' Massacre of the Innocents.
Oh, what a celebration!
Sorry about that. Okay. Well, I'll read Fireman's Lift,
great.
which of course is a way of lifting an inert body.
Okay, great.
In Italian it's called La Sede del Papa. I was standing beside you, looking up through the big tree of the cupola, where the church splits wide open to admit celestial choirs, the fallout of brightness. The Virgin was spiraling to heaven, hauled up in stages, past mist and shining, Teams of angelic arms were heaving, supporting, crowding her, and we stepped back as the painter longed to, while his arms swept in the large strokes. We saw the work entire and how the light melted and faded bodies so that loose feet and elbows and staring eyes floated in the wide stone petticoat, clear and free as weeds. This is what love sees, that angle, the crick in the branch loaded with fruit, a jaw defining itself, a shoulder yoked, the back making itself a roof, the legs a bridge, the hands a crane and a cradle, their heads bowed over to reflect on her fair face and hair, so like their own as she passed through their hands. We saw them lifting her, the pillars of their arms, her face a capital leaning into an arch, as the muscles clung and shifted for a final purchase together under her weight as she came to the edge of the cloud.
That's beautiful, Elaine. Thank you so
That's
much.
fine, yeah.
And it's a great feature to get the background to it as well, Elaine. And I could really see the carers there with your mother in that poem. So thanks for giving us that background.
I was thinking it's something we kind of touched on, but religion does feature in the work quite a lot, and there are obviously there are lots of references to nuns and anchoresses and cloisters and convents. I mean, one of the poems I like a lot is Chuilleanáin, the one where the aunt gets her French wrong.
Yes.
I have a pain in our teeth when she goes to the dentist. She was quite a character, wasn't she? But and I'm just wondering, why does that? Why do they surface? Is it that family connection?
It is partly, of course, just the fact that I had these 3 aunts who were nuns and 3 lay aunts, unmarried, who all lived together and did so much praying that the nuns didn't want to stay with them. They wanted to come and stay with us where they could have a bit of privacy.
Yeah.
So I was fascinated, I suppose, with that paradox of lay piety of that time. They were very old-fashioned, of course, even for the 40s and 50s. But lay piety, which seemed to be so much more intense in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, the nuns were out in the world, really. They were working, they were doing things, and sometimes, they were having to manage and quarrel. I remember listening to my Aunt Anna, in fact, quarrelling with her chaplain in French because he wanted her to give jobs. There were people already in the jobs. He wanted her to find jobs for the pieds noirs who were coming back from Algeria. And I remember her saying, men alike, that she wouldn't fire a lay person to put the pieds noirs in.
Yeah.
So, yes, they had something, and that fascinated me.
Indeed, and I'm kind of wondering, I mean, just even beyond those kind of family connections and those personalities, I mean, Christianity in general, I mean, it's kind of, it's a great fount of metaphors and stories in the poetry. I mean, you've talked about the folkloric connection too, and, Mary Magdalene, I was thinking, Mary Magdalene preaching in Marseille and all that. Are you interested in that kind of, if you like, the feminine presence in Christianity, or why is Mary Magdalene such an important kind of figure? I suppose I'm thinking also about the lives of women in general in the poetry.
I suppose one always asks, where are the women? What are they doing? I was particularly drawn to Mary Magdalene because of the hair fetish, since I have one myself. I also liked, I spent years teaching medieval but mostly Renaissance literature. And a lot of that, of course, is the Reformation, which is about language, editing, translation. How do you translate things? How do you translate from a translation? I've been drawn into the study of religion, quite apart from my personal religion, which is there. It is something that I don't think I'll run out of ideas as long as I'm thinking about that.
Mm-hmm. And as Peter said, nuns feature a lot in your writing, but I love the poem The Real Thing, in The Brazen Serpent, where you write about Sister Custos, a 16th century nun, But I know, I heard you speaking, Elaine, once, and you said that you have another obsession, which is trains. And in the next poem that we'd love you to read, you managed to get nuns and trains into it, which is some feat, I think. So I'm just wondering, would you like to read the poem The Sister from the Sunfish, your collection, which came out in 2009? It's a really fantastic poem, so we'd love to hear it, Elaine.
Yes. You find it now. It's there. The Sister. This poem is actually in 2 sections. How on earth did she manage that journey on her own? When she was a young woman, they had plenty to keep them busy. They were small, they felt queasy, they gripped a pillar in the shade and held on. And as for leaving home, still the trains have never changed. They thunder up the valleys, built for strapping fellows, flinging their big bundles easily onto high shelves, real men. She turned up at the station, small, her clothes once elegant, all black. Past the train window slid the suburbs, a fast river. She saw a white-haired man, waist deep, ducking under and rising again, a cormorant. A lump of a lad handed her bag down to her. Lopsided, she walked as far as the convent door. They greeted her with a leathery kiss. They told her where to find her bed and the hour of dinner. They knew the silent meal would be no surprise, no more than the hard bread, tougher at every slice. Nor the dead silence of night until the first train troubled the valley. She would know lying there, others were sitting up, working in pairs to finish the stitching, tacking the last of the lace. But the cold woke her, and a subtle mist as fine as galls hung on the glass. In the freezing dawn, she dragged a web just as light across her skin, veiling herself for good, and she slept on.
Oh, thanks, Elaine. That was lovely to hear. Thanks for reading the poem. And talking about reading, I thought I'd ask you about it, because in your lecture when you were Ireland Professor of Poetry, called Who Are the Readers of Poetry, you said that reading is a talent, and I really like that. The UK poet, it put me in mind of the UK poet Peter Sampson, who said, "You're writing in the dark if you read no one but yourself. And in the dark, you can't even read yourself properly." So I know that you have huge admiration as well for the reading of Seamus Heaney. I saw you praising his reading, which was really evident in Stepping Stones. You'd said he was a fiercely talented reader. But how important to you in your development as a poet was reading? And is it something that you'd recommend to younger poets coming up? Read, read, read?
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. When somebody says, I don't read poetry, I just write it,
Yeah.
you know what the poetry is going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely something, I mean, it tells you what you don't want to do apart from anything else.
Yeah.
It tells you what you might sometimes just stand back and say, gosh, isn't it wonderful to be able to do that?
Yeah.
I remember reading Shakespeare sonnets when I was young and thinking, how could anybody do that? But I never tried to do the same thing, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's something that there's a back and forth in reading, I think. It's a conversation with the person you're reading.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, it's kind of related, but you went through, I think it was almost 50 years in academia, and you never actually taught creative writing. And I was just wondering, I mean, do you feel that's something better avoided for you, or would you have liked to have done it, or do you feel that maybe writing can't really be taught?
I think it can be learned, and I think people who go off and do creative writing courses are probably doing a lot of learning, and to do it is a way of telling yourself and probably your relations that you're serious about this. I don't think it can be taught as such. I also am quite sure that I couldn't teach it. I remember I have tried very occasionally, and usually in faraway places, but I remember McNary used to teach in a university in Boston. I went along one year, and I remember trying to give some very tentative advice to somebody, And she said, well, I just feel as if I'd been pistol whipped with a brick. So I thought, this is not the job I think it's quite different from the other kind of teaching, which I sometimes think I can do. You know, find out what they don't know and tell them if you know it yourself. Yeah. And I don't think that's how people actually learn to be writers.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of drawing to an end now, but Enda and myself were just wondering, I think you've partially answered this already, what happens after a collection? I mean, you sit back and say, well, now, isn't that a great achievement? I'll sit back now and do something else. But I think given the quality of the new work, because I was very interested in a section of new work in the collected, and that makes me think, well, you're certainly not going to be sitting on the book and resting on the laurels of the collected.
In one way, I think one should always write with the idea, I don't have to do this, I could stop. But on the other hand, as long as I find interesting things to write about, I want to go on doing it, because I feel that there are lots of mysteries that I haven't solved, and that I probably never will solve, but there may be other ways into them that I haven't yet discovered. The poem that I've just finished writing is about Achilles in the Iliad, and the old man Phoenix remembering him as a little boy sitting on his knee at a feast. And I thought, what an extraordinary thing. I looked this up when my son and his wife told us that they were going to call their first child Phoenix. I thought, there was somebody called Phoenix in the Iliad, I must find out. I must go back and find out about him again. So that was a revelation, in fact, to discover that element in a war epic of people thinking about a child.
Yeah. Do you think there's kind of continual nourishment in the classics like that? Oh
God, yes. In a way, there's nourishment everywhere, you know, because you pick up a terrible book in a bookshop and you think, God, I'm glad I'm not going to have to read that. Yeah. But at the same time, it niggles you, and you think, what should they have done? What should they have said? Why am I so interested? Yeah. And you find it again.
So it's the constant questioning, isn't it, really, and being interested. So we feel that you're definitely going to keep going and going strong, Eiléan, and your collection is so wonderful. It's great to be here talking to you. So we thought that we'd just get one last poem from you, and I know you've written a beautiful poem about one of your grandchildren called Phoenix, which you want to read now, called Incipit Hodie from The Boys of Blue Hill, which was published in 2015. And just to say that this will be the final poem of the event, and once again we'd really like to wholeheartedly congratulate Eiléan Quillinan on the publication of her collected poems, and the Gallery Press as well for ensuring that the poems of this superb poet have reached us over the decades. And we would also like to thank MoLI for hosting us tonight, and for Poetry Ireland for their kind support, and thank you for joining us tonight too. So before we give the last word to Eiléan, we just thought, because this is such a huge celebration, and we would like to give Eiléan Quillinan a lovely bunch of flowers to say congratulations. So Eiléan, well done. Peter's passing them over now, delicately, and we give them to you there. Eiléan, well done.
Thank you.
Have you got them?
I have them, yes.
Okay, great.
Can I put them there?
Yeah, I think they should be okay there. Okay. Okay, Eiléan, so we're going to hear from the Boys of Blue Hill, and the poem is Incipit Hodie.
Yes, for Phoenix Alexander Woods, who was born on the 18th of April 2013. When you fell into our language like a fish into water, no wonder you were blinded by the splash you made. We wiped our eyes, but for you it took longer. It sprayed like feathers around you while you tried making out the noises, and slowly the stream ran calmer, though it took you a while to trust your ears and eyes. How are you supposed to grasp the water's flow? But look, those flourishes are pebbles and fish. Fish are slipping away, the water is clear and still. When you reach for words, they will be hard like pebbles in your hand.